in 2005. He has served as a commentator for the British Broadcasting Company documentary, The Real Amos and Andy, and the South Carolina educational television documentary, All Children of All People. Where do we go from here? And Africans in America, a South Carolina perspective. Is this all right?
Yeah.
He gives a Black History walking tour of Charleston entitled, If These Streets Could Talk.
Yeah, that's good.
The Lost Stories of Black Charleston, and hosts a YouTube historical channel called The American Storyteller. On radio, he's a commentary for WPAL FM in Charleston, South Carolina, co-hosts a PM Urban Commune South Carolina Educational Radio Network. He has also spoken to the University of California at Berkeley in 2013, G.L. Roberts Collegiate and Vocational School in Canada in 1998. You know, my words are very small. And the University of Memphis. A member of Friendship AME Church, he served as a president of Charleston's chapter of the Association for Study of African American Life and History. He has won citations from the South Carolina House of Representatives in 2020. The Charleston Post and Courier Golden Pen Award 2015, the Charleston Martin Luther King Award in 2014, the Black Student Union of College of Spartanburg, South Carolina in 2001, the Excel Award at the College of Charleston in 1999, the Outstanding Alumni Award from the Wando High School African American Club, Mount Pleasant, South Carolina in 1998, and the Outstanding Young Man of America in 1997. Brothers and sisters, family and friends, increasing faith. Professor Fordham's motto is, educate yourself to lead yourself. For if you wait on others to show you the way, you will wait for a long time. Brothers and sisters, family and friends, some near and afar, put your hands together as we bring to our forefront none other than Professor Damon Lamar Fordham.
Can y'all hear me all right? All right. Well, I know I got a big mouth anyway, so fortunately you got this shield here so I can talk so that people can hear me. But before I get into this, it's only proper that I give attention to my lovely family over here. Y'all kids stand up.
Awesome.
You know, our family's been going through a little bit of things lately, and so we appreciate the prayers that Reverend Snyder gave us a little bit earlier, and I thank you for that. And I also bless y'all for inviting me here today and the privilege of bringing them here for us. Now, having said all of that, let's get on to the matter at hand. Our subject today goes in, excuse me. Now, our subject for the day is from Deuteronomy 4th chapter, 9th verse, which teaches us these words. Only take heed to thyself, and keep thy soul diligently, lest thou forget the things that which thine eyes have seen, and lest they depart from them all the days of thy life, but teach them to thy sons, and to thy sons' sons. And I hope y'all beg pardon if I add to thy daughters, and thy daughters' daughters, along with that. Now, what that means is that we should take what we know and pass it down to the youth for the betterment of the nation, for the people, and for humanity itself. And there have a lot of the things that have not been taught over the years. And then also, on the other hand, we have had a lot of things that have been taught wrongly to us, which is one of the main causes of the confusion that exists among us, not only as a people, but also as a nation, and also as humanity. Now, when we discuss a problem, it's important to understand this, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen. You cannot find the cure until you find the cause.
Amen.
And too often we walk around without knowing the cause of our problems. And one thing, especially as black people, we often ask ourselves, but seldom get an answer. Why and how did we get into this condition that we are in today?
Amen.
And as a historian, I look at it like this. My job is not to just teach people in the ivory towers of the academic world, colleges and all that, but to take that message out to the people who need it the most. Why? Because when I was a young man, some wise and intelligent adults took their time with me to teach me things and give me a love and enhance my love of reading and libraries and things like that. And I figure that those of us who were in that position have a duty to take what we know out to the average, everyday person who needs it the most. So the story begins with this simple fact here. You often get on the internet and you see these people on there on YouTube or hear these fellas in the barbershop talking all this stuff about Christianity is a white man's religion and that they created this to keep our people's minds in slavery. Ladies and gentlemen, here's the truth of that. If you look throughout the Old and the New Testaments, you see them mention people like Queen Candace, the Ethiopian eunuch, the Simon and Cyrene, as well as the Pharaoh Taharka in the book of Samuel, among other things. And one of the things that these people have in common is that the Bible is very explicit in mentioning that these people came from Ethiopia. And ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you this. Where is Ethiopia? Where? Africa. Make sure the people watching this hear this. Ethiopia, where? Africa. Hello. And history teaches us that the Christian churches existed in Ethiopia prior to their appearances in much of the northern parts of Europe. After the Emperor Constantine made Christianity the legal religion in Rome, many of them were already practicing it in Ethiopia. So if Christianity is supposed to be the white man's religion, somebody need to get the memo.
Right.
So the thing is, whenever you are challenged with information, the first lesson of the morning is this. I always tell my students the 3 F's. Fight the foolishness with the facts.
Come on.
Now, but wait, how do we get from that to this? Well, you know, in every empire, whenever you are talking about ancient Greece, ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, ancient Babylon, and ancient Rome, which conditions greatly mirror ours right now. You know, some of you who have taken science in school know about Sir Isaac Newton and the law of gravity, which teaches us what goes up must go down.
All right.
Right. What goes up must go down. Great nations rise, and throughout history, great nations have fallen. All right? Now, in West Africa, we had great nations like Ghana, Mali, Songhai. But there came a point when those empires fell, and they were invaded by these people from Morocco around 1591. And so it was this time that the Europeans were getting into sailing into different places for natural resources. And so the Portuguese had taken Brazil, and they couldn't get the natives to do their bidding. And so by then they had already figured out that our ancestors were in Africa and started taking us over there in slavery, right? And the same thing happened when they when the British started coming into what we now call the United States of America about a century later. But here's the thing about it. History teaches us that during the time that the first enslaved people were brought to these United States in the 1600s in Virginia, they had the poor whites called the indentured servants. These were white people who had committed crimes in Europe, and they brought them over here for the purpose of cheap labor. They would be enslaved for 7 years. Then they would be free to own land and be citizens and all of that, right? But Houston, we had a problem. You see, these poor whites and these enslaved blacks were getting along a little too well for the people who were running things. And they're like, wait a minute now, this is getting a little out of hand here. Because they were coming together after they were working the tobacco fields, drinking together, and smoking tobacco together, and even having children together, and so forth. So, as all this was happening, there was a white man named Nathaniel Bacon, 1676, who told the enslaved blacks and the poor white indentured servants, we need to come together and put a stop to this mess. And they had Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon died of dysentery, where you lose your bodily fluids and all of that. And the colonial Virginia government said, that was close. Man, we can't let this happen again. So they indoctrinated the poor whites with the idea that if the blacks were equal to them, that they would be on the bottom of society. And they can't let that happen. And so they put the Africans in a permanent position of slavery to keep them as that permanent source of cheap labor. And so as long as the poor whites were convinced that they had to keep the Africans down, Booker T. Washington, the great educator, said it best. You can't keep me down in the ditch without you getting dirty yourself. So as you had the poor whites and the blacks, enslaved blacks, divided against each other, the rich whites sat on the feet of their mansions and their houses of government, dividing and conquering the poor so that the rich could stay rich. And that's what racism is all about, Charles. Again, you can't know the cause until you find the cure, until you find the cause. But in spite of all of that, contrary to popular belief, not all of our ancestors who were in slavery were illiterate. There were many slave masters who early on, they encouraged some of their slaves to read and write so that they could become bookkeepers and accountants on the plantations. Anybody here from Moncks Corner? Very good.
Live in Moncks Corner.
All right.
Live there.
Next door to Moncks Corner in Cordsville, you have Mepkin Plantation, Mepkin Abbey, right?
All they want to go to.
Before that, it was Mepkin Plantation,
Oh.
run by Henry Lawrence back in the 1700s. Henry Lawrence had a slave named Samuel Massey, who wrote letters back and forth to him about the condition of the plantation whenever he was away. All right? And he wrote down what was probably the first known written letters by a black South Carolinian. But the most interesting example of this comes from, originally from St. Thomas Virgin Islands. There was a man there by the name of Captain Joseph Vesey, who enslaved a man named Denmark. And he brought Denmark up here in 1783. Denmark did the accounting for his enslaved plantation, but get this, he also read on his own. He read things like Exodus 21:16 that said, he that stealeth a man and selleth him shall be put to death. He read Revelation 13:10 that said, he that leadeth into captivity shall be led into captivity. All right? Stuff you don't often usually hear in church.
Right.
But the key thing is here, he took the time to read this on his own. And you can learn a lot when you read things on your own
Yes.
that other people may not teach you.
Indeed.
And that's important. So, when they came to Charleston, Denmark was rented out to other slave owners where Captain Vesey would split the commissions with him. And he bought a lottery ticket in 1799 and won $1,500. So he went back to Captain Vesey. Well, let's see here, writing in my ledger. Oh, Denmark, yes, come in, what can I do for you? Captain Vesey, may I ask you a question? Why, certainly, Denmark, what is it? Sir, how much am I worth? How much are you worth? Let's see. Now, according to my ledger here, you're worth $600. Why do you ask? Look at it!
Imagine that.
Look at it! Okay, I'm worth 600. Here's it. See ya. Hey, wait a minute, Denmark. Have a nice day.
Wow.
So they went to court, and he got his freedom papers.
Wow.
And he gathered his enslaved brethren around him and said that they would break into the city armory and steal guns and set fires. When they came to put them out, And then he went, then they would go to the Charleston Harbor and hijack ships to sail to Haiti, where Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines liberated the black slaves of Haiti from under the clutches of the French dictator Napoleon Bonaparte. Stuff you don't usually hear outside the college classrooms. And so, unfortunately, he warned his followers, do not tell the house Negroes. Now, y'all know what I mean by the house Negroes. These were the ones who were doing the cooking and the cleaning and the babysitting as opposed to working out in the fields, okay? Well, on May the 25th, 1822, one of them by the name of William Paul went over to the old Exchange building on the corner of East Bay and Broad. Hey, Peter, what's going on? Y'all phone, Mr. Paul. How's you doing? I'm fine, Peter. Hey, Peter, you want to get down with Denmark Beasley's doing? Denmark Beasley? Who that am, boss? Shh. Not so loud, Peter. You see, here's our plan. We're going to... Ooh, wait! Feet don't fail me now. Hey, Peter, wait a minute. You can figure out where this is going, but I'm going to tell you. He went to his master, Captain John Prelude. Mr. Prelude, Mr. Boss Man, so what are we going to do, boss? What are we going to do? Why, Peter, this is atrocious. I must call out the militia right now, and explicitly even. He called out the militia, and Beasley and 36 of his followers were captured, and on July the 2nd, 1822, they were hanged by the neck until dead. However, that is not the end of the story. You see, there was another type of African American who lived on Tradd Street, not too far from this. His name was Bishop Daniel Alexander Payne. He had a school for free and enslaved children, but the state of South Carolina shut him down because since Beasley was using the Bible and the Declaration of Independence to encourage liberation, they figured that they should make it illegal for African Americans to learn to read and write. So here's what he did. After they shut down his school, he went to Xenia, Ohio, where he helped form Wilberforce University, the first black college in America that was run by black people.
Wow.
And that was in 1856, years before freedom. Something to consider, right? And so one of his graduates was Bishop Richard Harvey King. Bishop King came down here in 1865, and he wanted independence for the people. So he started a community. Anybody here from Somerville? Ever heard of Lincolnville?
Yeah.
He was the man who started Lincolnville, South Carolina.
Wow.
And he also took what was left of Denmark Beasley's church, which was at that point the Hempstead AME Church over on the east side. He took what was left of that and built a new building on 110 Calhoun Street. He named it after the Hebrew word for God is with us and said this would be the mother of the new black church in Charleston. That's how Mother Emanuel came to be. So now you know.
That's good. That's good.
Now, so this goes to show you that slavery was not the complete failure for African Americans. There's some who managed to take what little they had and take it to move forward to the next level. For example, when I was in Beaufort recently, I stopped over at the Combahee Bridge. And y'all know what the Combahee Bridge is famous for? Well, let me tell you. There was a movie that was made about this last year that was somewhat fairly accurate, about a lady who was born without knowing how to read and write at all, and yet having the vision to take her people out of slavery and lead them up to freedom into the North. Of course, I'm speaking here of the great Harriet Tubman. But here's the part of the story that they talked about in the movie, but most people still don't know, is that during the Civil War, she went down to about the Combahee River in Beaufort, which is the border between Colleton County and Beaufort County. If you're going south on 17 towards Savannah, Beaufort, you see this. And it was at that location that Harriet Tubman gathered up 700 slaves. And the Union Army defeated the Confederates in that region. She led them across that river and into freedom. 700 right down in Beaufort County. And so this is a message especially to the young girls in this audience today, that you should not let poverty, lack of education, or your sex be a barrier to stop you from being great. Keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
So let's take our story on up a little bit further. You had what was called the Reconstruction days after slavery ended, when the North took over the South and passed amendments to give us some sort of freedom. 76 blacks and 48 whites gathered at the courthouse on the corner of Meeting and Broad Streets. And these 76 blacks and 48 whites created a new constitution in South Carolina that called for an end to discrimination laws. Women would be allowed to divorce abusive husbands, and there would be state hospitals and mental institutions. One of the people who passed laws there was the great Robert Smalls, who had lived for a time in Charleston. He had sneaked, during slavery, he sneaked his family aboard a Confederate ship in Charleston Harbor and sailed them into freedom, into free waters. And he got an audience with a very great man shortly after that. You might have heard of him. Look at him on the penny. His name was Abraham Lincoln. And so another great man also met with Lincoln to negotiate him. During slavery, his slave master said that if you teach him how to read and write, it would ruin his life and make him unfit to be a slave. He goes, oh, really? And so he gathered scraps of learning where he could and read a book called The Columbian Orator, with the great speeches of George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Cicero, Julius Caesar, and many of the great Roman and Greek leaders of ancient times. And he went throughout the country speaking against slavery until he met with Abraham Lincoln in 1863 to negotiate the freedom of his people. You might have heard of him. His name was Frederick Douglass. And during that Reconstruction period, that same Robert Smalls who I told you about, he passed a law at that convention over on Meeting and Broad Streets. On January the 23rd, 1868, the law said, resolved, all children between the ages of 7 and 14 must attend public school at least 6 months a year under penalty of non-compliance.
Oh, wow.
It is because of this ex-slave, Robert Smalls, that you have public schools in South Carolina. Down in Louisiana, Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback became the governor of Louisiana in 1873 and the founder of Southern University, one in Baton Rouge, one of the largest black schools in America. And here in South Carolina, my alma mater, the University of South Carolina, was the only integrated university in the South from 1873 to 1877. They have the statue of Professor Richard Greener, the first black professor in the South, by the library right now as we speak. So what happened? Well, you had the Klan and the group called the Red Shirts and all of them rebelled against this. Massive shootouts throughout the South. So much so that the North said, man, we can't mess with this anymore, and left the South to its own devices. And leaving their own devices was a continuation of separating the blacks and the poor whites so that the rich could run things. And that's why you have segregation. And in order to keep the African Americans as the permanent class of cheap labor, this is why the schools were segregated and given inferior conditions. Money, 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 rocking everywhere, in essence. But there were people who stood up to this. In 1895, and I'm writing a book on this as we speak, 6 African Americans: Robert Anderson from Georgetown, Robert Smalls from Beaufort, Thomas Miller from Charleston, William J. Whipper from Charleston, and Isaiah Reed and James Wigg from Beaufort. They challenged Ben Tillman, who was the segregationist senator who made the segregation laws in South Carolina. And they spoke up. William Whipper told Benjamin Tillman, the car of Negro progress is coming, and you can do nothing to stop it. Crush us as we may, the Negro will rise, we will come up on top. No matter what you say, we cannot be kept down forever because it's not in the national order of things. Well, they were ridiculed, but they stood their ground. And that led for the movement that was to come, such as the great lady here in Charleston, the September Clark. You see the September Clark School, the September Clark Free Expressway. But those names will not mean anything unless you know the stories behind those names. Taught in an old rundown school on Johns Island, and was fired from teaching because of her civil rights activities. But yet, when she was fired, she didn't let that stop her. She went throughout the South teaching illiterate adults how to read and write and to register, to vote, and to write their own checks and take charge of their own lives, understanding that literacy leads to liberation.
That's good.
So Martin Luther King had her as her adult education director, as a matter of fact. And one of her students was the great Esau Jenkins of Johns Island. Esau Jenkins had a fourth grade education, but yet he established the credit union over on Charleston's east side. He was the first black person to run for the school board in modern times. And when he lost, they said, "Man, why were you wasting your time?" And he said, "I wasn't wasting my time. I'm making it possible so that there will become someone behind me who could eventually get on the school board." You see, people who are not wise just see what's in front of them.
Right.
People
Right.
who are wise see paved what's ahead,
Yes.
and they lay pave the way for what's ahead. And so he managed to succeed in helping lift up the people from Johns Island, so much so that Dr. King recognized him for his efforts. And shortly before he was killed in a car crash on October 30th, 1972, he told an audience at Hot Gap Middle School to never think that their education puts them above their parents or people who were not as fortunate as they were to get an education. Because guess what, he said? They might know something that you don't know. You see, you can study to get knowledge, but you have to live to get wisdom. Now, if you don't have knowledge, you can be wise. My grandmother never learned how to read and write. But whenever I came home from school, she would insist that I read to her out of her storybooks. And I couldn't understand why she wanted me to do this. But I later understood that as a little girl, she worked into the fields of Allendale, South Carolina, where she did not have that opportunity to read and write. And as any good grandmother or any good father, any good mother did, she wanted things for me to go better than her. So you can have knowledge, but you can have wisdom without having knowledge. But you can also have knowledge without wisdom. And that's a dangerous thing.
That is a dangerous thing.
And it's even worse,
Yes.
is when you either have knowledge or wisdom. You're in a really bad fix then. Because let's think about this for a minute.
True.
One of the most common things that are said to our black children, one of the most dangerous things, is when you tell the children that black people are like crabs in a barrel. Whenever we get up, the other pulls one another down, and we just can't get together for nothing, and so on and so forth. You are poisoning the children's mind when you tell them things like that. You make them believe that we are good at all things physical and nothing mental. When the children go to school and they like to read and they speak well, they're like, "Oh, he's acting white."
Right.
Well, when they say that, hold up, whoa.
Right.
If speaking well
Right.
and loving to read and study is acting white, then what are you saying about acting black?
Exactly.
Are you trying to say that to be black is to be ignorant?
Right.
No, we can't tell our children things
Right.
like that. That's
Right.
dangerous. See, that's
Absolutely.
the power in the tongue can either build or destroy.
Sure.
And as that things about black people being so disunited, let me break it down to y'all like this. You had, let's see, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, the war in Iraq, the nuclear bomb. You have all those things, right? Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you this. If we are the most disunited race on earth, did black people start any of those things?
Come on. Come on.
I'm not done yet.
Get a sip of water on
But
that.
I wanted to make you think for a minute.
Yeah.
See, I bet you might try that.
That's good. That's good. Mm-hmm.
So
Hmm.
most people only know what they are told.
Mm-hmm. True.
And we have to encourage them to go beyond that, to read and to understand things. And one other thing I have to say about that before I wrap this up is that if you're going to learn things, be careful about that internet, okay? Because there's plenty of junk on the internet.
True.
A lot of bad misinformation out there. And trying to go to a lot of these memes and some of these characters on YouTube, on the internet, is like Ray Charles going to Stevie Wonder and asking for directions.
You know what?
Stevie,
Stay over there.
I need some help. Help me
Right.
across the
Right.
street.
Right.
Why, Raymond, aren't you lovely? That one Stevie.
True.
And if Ray Charles leaves Stevie Wonder across the street,
Right.
doesn't even this say that the blind leadeth the blind,
on.
they falleth in the ditch?
Come on. They'll be right in the bit.
No. You use that at times, but see, if you use the internet, you have to learn the ability to separate the truth from the
Indeed.
trash.
Indeed. Indeed.
Okay? You have to learn to cross-reference your materials. You're better off in the library
Right.
as a whole. And it's kind of good if you can use both, but if you do that, it's just like when you use any type of medicine or any type of instrument, whether it is good or bad depends on the person who is using it.
Indeed. Yes, sir. Yes,
So we
sir.
have to use that type of thing with discretion. So, and this is especially important for young people because if they grow up surrounded by negativity and misinformation and bad influences and all that, it is important that you seek wise mentors or that you go to or that you learn to read so you can get ideas that are beyond everything that you see beyond you. Because all great people became great from other people helping them to become great.
Indeed.
And I will use this final example of that. Some of you might remember when man first landed on the moon, July 20th, 1969. Well, it's not too long after that, they shot back from the moon, they splashed down into the harbors of Hawaii. And while that happened, there was a crowd of people that went out there to see President Richard Nixon come over to give these guys their medals and thank them for what they did and so forth. And among them was this little boy who was sitting on top of his grandfather's shoulders. So they're all watching this and they see the president shake the astronaut's hand. And the grandfather told his grandson, "Son, this is what Americans can do if we put our minds to it." And he put that positive affirmation into this young boy's head. He didn't say, just because your daddy ran off, you're going to be nothing just like him. He didn't say, just because your mother was a single mother, you're not going to be anything. He didn't say any of that. No. He put that positive affirmation in that young boy's head. Whatever happened to him? Well, he defied history because on November 4th, 2008, against the advice of so many who didn't think it was possible, he was elected the first African-American president of the United States. I'm speaking of Barack Obama. And that is why it is so important that you speak life into these young people's minds. If their parents didn't turn out so right, that does not doom them. Because they have minds of their own. And you have to teach them to develop those minds of their own. And once you tell them to develop those minds of their own and keep that positive affirmation to them, then, as the song says, victory is mine.
Yes.
And on that note,
All right. Victory today is mine. Victory today is mine. Awesome. Amazing. That's good.
Let's give Professor
good word right there.
Amen. Did you enjoy this on this morning?
Yes.
Amen. One of the greatest, actually, I believe, the greatest storyteller in Charleston.
Amen.
I had the privilege of studying some of the messages of Professor Fordham on the YouTube, and I was like, man, especially when he was talking about education and how education has played a part in our economics here in South Carolina. And I thought that was just so awesome. I didn't send this to you, but I was going to open up the door for questions and answers with individuals. If you had any questions for Professor Fordham, I was going to extend this opportunity for any individual on today that have any questions, young people who had questions. Najee came from up top, and she sat down and she said, Pastor Frank, some of the things that Professor Fordham was saying, I read that before. I was like, well, come on and have a seat. There were individuals in the audience, young individuals in the audience that was listening for word.
Yes.
And were so intrigued that she came down from the media department just to sit down and fully hear it. So I believe that it is good if adults and teenagers, if you have any questions at all about our history, right here in Charleston, many things that Met Canally. I would go down to Met Canally and just sit there all the time and get to know the true story about it. So this is awesome. So again, I'm going to open up the door. If you have any questions, comments about what you heard on today, feel free.
Going once. Yes, ma'am. No, for real, go ahead. That's what I'm here for. I'm happy to do this.
Professor Fordham,
Yes, sir.
our education, okay? Where do you think our education is now?
Okay, let me say something about that. I'm glad you brought that up. The reason that a lot of you may not know some of the things that I just talked about is because after the Civil War and the Reconstruction era ended and all of that, and they brought segregation laws to state, there was an organization called the United Daughters of the Confederacy who wanted to play up the teaching of the role of the Confederates in the Civil War and play down the accomplishments of Reconstruction and make it look like it was a terrible thing and so forth. So that was the reason why, one of the reasons why you never heard these type of things before. And so they stopped having influence in the state school system in 1984. Now, along with that, of course, as I said earlier, the reason that African Americans receive such a poor education in places like this is so that they can remain a permanent class of cheap labor, you see. But although that was the situation with our parents and grandparents and all of them, we still see some of the lingering effects of that today. But part of the reason I am telling you this is so that you can stand up and be in a position to challenge this so you can make it better for you, yourselves, and your children.
That's good.
Yes?
Question. Now, you did the research on your own after school, or it's something you learned in school?
Well, see, if you remember, this is still on live.
I can turn
I
off?
definitely want people to hear this part. Okay, you might remember back about a month ago when President Biden was inaugurated, they had this little girl named Amanda Gorman, who gave this beautiful poetry oration, right? And she, in an interview on the Today Show, not too long, on the Today Show after that, she called herself one of those weird kids. When she was a little girl, she used to like to read, and everybody thought that she was strange for loving to read instead of being out there twerking and all this other sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But she explained, but see, and I relate to that because see, I was one of those kids who loved to read. You see, and people are like, "Oh, you're weird." And then I was very bad at sports too. And to this day, when we start talking about sports, I just kind of zone out a little bit because I was really into reading, and I was blessed to have a dad who supported that, even though a lot of people thought I was strange. So much of this stuff I got on my own. When I got to the University of South Carolina, there was Dr. Willie Harriford of the Black Studies Department, and this was after my dad died. He kind of took me under his wing when he saw how into history I was. He died recently, and guess what? Remember that library I told you where they have the statue next to the black professor? They're renamed the library after Dean Harrison.
Wow. Your mentor.
So I say all that to say that yes, I got it on my own, but to young people who are watching this, who, if you like to read and are really not into a whole lot of other things going on around you and all that, that's all right. It's okay to just be you and develop whatever talents you have, whether it's sports, whether it's dancing, whether it's books or anything like that. Develop what you like to do something constructive, because the people who mock you today will praise you tomorrow.
That's good. That's good.
Okay, anything else?
That's good. I love it.
Again, let's give Professor Fordham another round of applause. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah.
Amen. Amen. Hallelujah. Well, thank you, Professor Fordham. Thank you. Amen. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, now what we're going to do is we're going to go into our giving, right? Okay, I think I'm right. Okay, yeah, okay. Okay, I think I'm good. Amen, all right. We're going to go into this part of the service where we're going to give on this morning. Professor Fordham, I pray that I practice how to speak on time like you.
Bless God.
That was, my wife, she's clapping like, okay.
Hey, you
That
were
would be
pretty
amazing.
good right up there. You had me with the tears almost.
Okay, well, thank you, sir. All right, Pastor Sam, come on, give it up for Pastor Sam as he comes. Our new associate. And Deacon
Go
Abraham.
ahead, Deke. Go ahead, Deke. All right, I see you, Deke. Woo!
Hey, good morning. We got envelope this morning. Please raise your hand. The link in the back. She's coming with envelopes.
Awesome. Come on, give him music. Najee.
While we wait on and giving music, what does Pastor Frank keep finding these Caribbean theme songs?
He be at work finding his songs.
He'll pull one out the hat. And he'll be like,
Never even heard. Uh-oh. Now you gotta Google it and YouTube it.
listen, just got your envelope ready. Go ahead and stand and come bring the envelope to Brother Abraham.
If I could do what's your name? Cash App him? Yeah. Cash App.
Also, you can give via Cash App. Increasing faithfulness.
Everyone